Debate at 8 on BBC Channel 6. I am non-binary transracial black Filipino ostrich demigod who does not engage in sexual activities. And today we have Hillary Trump with us debating the forgotten history of the United States against Oliver Stone, here with us over Omegle. We also have Donald Clinton and Obama bin Laden over Skype as they are in the country currently. This program is brought to you by Durex, Love Sex. Public service announcement brought to you by Pampers, Love Sleep and Play. Make YouTube great again. Subscribe to PewDiePie. Also,
everyone, we have an announcement to make. Stop bullying!
Thank you for having me on this debate on the forgotten history of the United States. It is not forgotten. I know everything about it. And I would say on the topic of the Cold War, which we'll be discussing today, the beginning of the Cold War was incited by the United States, not Russia. Russia was scared for itself. They had twice been invaded by Germany. When the Allies started to prepare Germany to be able to fight again, this was not a good prospect for Russia. On top of that, Russia was struggling to regain its strategic depth in order to have a barrier of defense the next time that Germany would inevitably attack. They just wanted a barrier so that they couldn't be invaded from Europe. They were not invading or taking over Europe as the United States so outrageously claimed. They were just assisting their allies and protecting themselves. Russia wanted so badly to be at peace with the United States and other European nations that they actually discouraged communism around them in places such as China to appease the US. But this had no effect on the United States, which had a vendetta against Russia. After Winston Churchill's speech demonizing Russia, there was no going back to the wartime alliance that was held before. On top of the speech, the US pumped out tons of anti-Soviet propaganda and lies to further demonize the Russians. The US cut all support to Russia, who had to fend for itself and its starving citizens in order to repair itself after the war.
Hi there, I'm Hillary Trump. Vote for me in the 2020 elections. Today, I'm talking about Oliver Stone cherry-picking history. If the United States hadn't been resistant to assisting the Soviet Union in the late 1930s, Stalin would have never allied with Hitler's Germany. So he says. When really, Stalin was greedy and would have joined Hitler because he would have wanted Poland in the end. Also, he wants an alliance with an aggressive people. He is an alliance with aggressive people, attacking everyone. And he didn't even mention the severity of the Soviets. You cherry-pick and romanticize history as if it's something that you can easily pick from and then make it your own little story. You ignored the brutal details of the Soviets, like the Soviets and the Nazi military cooperation, the violent bifurcation of Poland, the Soviet invasions of Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. You stated Stalin asserted control over the Baltics and was guilty of heavy-handed treatment of Eastern Europe. That's quite a gentle way of describing almost half a century of brutal occupation. You described the Marshall Plan to an anti-Soviet provocation, when the main objective was to simply rebuild Europe. Maybe aggravating the Soviet Union was a benefit, but it was not the main objective. Also, Oliver Stone claimed that the plan, and I quote, worsened Soviet fears of both a rearmed Germany and capitalist encirclement. Capitalism was not something that was as domineering as communism. Of course, major countries influence others, but the Marshall Plan was not to spread capitalism, but rather to prevent communism, which is quite a pushy ideology if you ask me in the 2020 elections. Mr. Stone, are you aware that you stated fake news? What's the word I'm looking for? Lied? According to your history, cherry-picking brain, you implied that Russia did not want any sort of blockade. Well, if you check the year 1961, when the Berlin crisis was occurring, it was the Soviets during that occupation that had this grand divider. You stated the Berlin Wall was to get rid of immediate danger. The USA was not only the contender at this time. You keep blaming it all on the United States as if there's some sort of villain, when really the Soviets were the villains as well. In fact, I would argue they were probably the worst villains out of everyone. Russia increased tensions as they continued to bully the United States because they refused to withdraw from West Berlin. Vote for me in the 2020 election.
debate is heating up. We'll get back to it after a short break. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for sticking with us. Now back to the debate. Mr. Lawton, take it away.
Russia was not the aggressor in all this. It was actually the victim of political assumption and misinterpretation.
The Soviets cannot be considered a victim, but only as the aggressors. They felt entitled to receive the entirety of Eastern Europe under the Soviet banner and force their regimes and ideologies onto defenseless sovereign nations.
But you see, Russia is entitled to their own free will. We should not, as outsiders, pretend to understand the situation in Eastern Europe. We turn a blind eye to the needless and brutal atrocities carried out by the US in their attempt to expand their territory in a land that was not theirs. The slaughter of Native Americans was unnecessary and pointless. However, Russia's attempts to expand and grow will not include mindless violence and brutality. The transition will be smooth as long as there is no outside interference. The countries that comprise Eastern Europe are defenseless and will not withstand an invading force. Russia is trying to help elevate the situation in these countries, and in return, their newfound military presence will help further fortify the nation of Russia, create a sort of buffer zone. Russia is just trying to protect its own interests, and there is nothing wrong with that. If the US is allowed to establish its military presence, why shouldn't other countries be allowed to do the same?
To romanticize the Soviet regime is absolutely appalling. Blaming the aggression made by the Soviet Union on American aggression is ludicrous. The Soviets were the ones who built the Berlin Wall and decided to militarize the border of East and West Germany. They are the very conspirators of the Cold War. Joseph Stalin was responsible for the slaughters of millions. He sent families, peasants, and any other political prisoners into prison camps called gulags. This is not a man of visions. This is a psychopathic killer. He stripped farmers of their possessions and farmland and were rounded up and executed by the thousands. They started a famine in Ukraine and killed millions within a year and denied all the claims, even though the evidence was heavily pitted against them. Those who attempted to speak up were never seen again. Is this what communism is? Europe was only under the threat of Soviet invasion. You have to be joking if you were to assume that Europe had any nation powerful enough that would attempt an invasion of another country. Honestly, to say that the Soviet Union was trying to help these countries is laughable. You have to be stupid to think that the Soviets were not only trying to gain a larger landmass in an attempt to enlarge their buffer zones and gain warm water ports and a supply of natural resources. The Soviets are no saints. They raped and pillaged every town and village they came across in World War II. Stalin was notified of this, but he did nothing to stop it. Rather, he let them do it for the sake of morale. Or was it just that Stalin himself was a rapist?